In 1876, the concept of American manifest destiny is fully realized. Millions journey westward in search of fertile land and gold. New towns, cities, and railroads are emerging across the nation. However, the region known as the Wild West is neither untamed nor uninhabited. For generations, indigenous nations have resided on this land. They face relentless assaults from white settlers who force them onto increasingly smaller and poorer reservations. These reservations are often disregarded by the United States government, which seizes land at its discretion. The Great Sioux Reservation is the largest among them. The Sioux, among the most militarized and assertive tribes, have claimed this territory as their own after being driven westward by the United States. A period of peace ensues, but this is disrupted when gold is discovered on their lands. Suddenly, previous treaties lose their significance. Prospectors and settlers begin to arrive, soon supported by the United States military, eager for any justification to permanently displace the indigenous peoples. When native groups refuse to stay on their impoverished reservations and venture out to gather food, the United States commands 3 columns to launch an attack. However, progress is slow. It is not until June that the 2 northern columns merge, while the third is repelled. By this time, winter has passed. The indigenous peoples are at their strongest during the height of summer, with ample fodder and forage available. Frustrated by the lack of advancement, U.S. Army Command assigns George Armstrong Custer and 700 cavalry troops to locate and confront the largest native force, which is gathering under Chief Sitting Bull's leadership. Custer, both courageous and impulsive, is confident that his well-trained soldiers will easily overcome any native opposition. On June 25th, he discovers the enemy camp, housing 3,000 warriors in a valley along the Little Bighorn River. Concerned that the enemy might escape, he opts to launch an attack that afternoon. The main objective for Custer is to target the enemy camp followers. Capturing them is crucial leverage for negotiations. Consequently, Custer organizes his troops into 3 divisions. The first group consists of 295 men under Captain Benton, who will secure the baggage train and serve as a reserve. The second group, comprising 175 men under Major Renault, will cross the Little Bighorn River to the south and launch a direct assault on the native camp. The third group, led by Custer himself with 221 men, will maneuver north along the eastern bank of the river, utilizing the hills and ravines to conceal his approach. This strategy will position him ideally to strike at the fleeing non-combatants. At 3 p.m., Major Renault crosses the Little Bighorn, initiating the attack. Displacing native skirmishers, his troops dismount and establish 3 firing lines just outside the enemy camp. However, he has grossly misjudged the enemy's determination. Instead of retreating, several hundred warriors have assembled. They launch a full-scale counterattack. Renault's line fights valiantly, but while the right flank is securely anchored on the river, the left flank remains vulnerable. As native riders begin to exploit this gap, Renault abruptly commands a retreat. The warriors give chase. Renault manages to regroup his men and establish a second line within dense woodlands. Their precise and disciplined fire rains down on the attacking forces. Numerous charges are repelled under a barrage of gunfire. Amid the tumult of battle, Major Renault turns to a local guide for counsel. Suddenly, the guide is shot in the head, splattering Renault with blood. Deeply unsettled, Renault shouts, "All those who wish to escape, follow me." Chaos ensues as some men join Renault, while others who do not hear his command remain to fight. It becomes a frantic race to evade the pursuing warriors, resulting in many casualties. The assaults cease only at 4 p.m., when Bentin's reserve finally arrives to bolster the line. In a mere hour, Major Renault has suffered the loss of 77 men, which is 40% of his initial force. What is even more concerning is that they are in no position to assist Custer, who is currently riding alone and oblivious to the entire native army. While Renault departs to assault the native camp from the south, Custer leads his 200 men northward. As Custer progresses slowly around the hills, he can hear the distant sounds of battle and decides to send 80 men to attack the native camp from the east. Initially, they encounter minimal resistance. However, enemy numbers soon begin to increase. The entire native army is shifting away from the beleaguered Renault towards the now significantly vulnerable Custer. The Federals start to retreat, attempting to fend off encirclement attempts. Nevertheless, Custer remains unaware of the peril he faces. He is focused on capturing hostages and destroying the enemy camp. The advance will persist. Moving west with a third of his men in search of potential hostages, he leaves the remainder in a defensive formation. At the forefront, a slender skirmisher outpost. Behind them, on a hill, the main body of troops is positioned in a firing line. Further back, there is a reserve, along with a small contingent dispatched to thwart a detected flanking maneuver. Unbeknownst to the 7th Cavalry, they are now entirely encircled by the native army. The fighting escalates rapidly as dozens of native warriors transform into hundreds, then thousands. The skirmishers are swiftly overwhelmed. Survivors regroup around the main line as the natives close in. A barrage of gunfire rains down upon their advance. The natives stagger back momentarily. Then a group of warriors surges from the south, charging into the line. Intense hand-to-hand combat ensues. One by one, men retreat to the final reserve line as chaos envelops the formation. However, the disorder caused by the retreat of the second line is infectious as they flee into the reserve. The formation becomes disorganized and bewildered. Before long, the enemy is upon them. The reserves put up a determined fight, but a cavalry charge from the rear, led by Chief Crazy Horse, disrupts any remaining unity. The few survivors make their way to Custer's position. Until this point, Custer could only observe the calamity consuming his own forces. Filled with horror, he nonetheless gathers the remaining members of his command and retreats to a small hill. From this vantage point, he can see the vast enemy army advancing towards him. There is no chance of escape. Forming a defensive circle and utilizing the corpses of fallen horses for protection, Custer prepares for his final stand. Meanwhile, Benton, along with several other officers, finally approaches Custer's location. They arrive too few and too late, as the last of Custer's men are systematically eliminated, one after another. The survivors retreat to their supply train and defend against a series of skirmishes throughout the night. The Battle of the Little Bighorn proved to be a catastrophe for the United States. Overly ambitious and lacking proper regard for their opponent, Custer's command endured 46% casualties, including the loss of half the officers. Native casualties were approximately half that number. While celebrated in popular legend as a doomed yet noble endeavor, the reality is that the Battle of the Little Bighorn was an imprudent miscalculation against an enemy force. Despite the victory, the outcome of the war was already predetermined. The conflict concludes in May 1877. Although defeated and ultimately subdued, the courageous resistance of the Indian tribes remains a significant moment in the struggle against westward expansion, a moment that will forever be remembered along the banks of the Little Bighorn.